Have you ever considered the true worth of a thing? Not its price in coin, but its value when the world narrows to a single, desperate need. We are taught to measure inheritance in acres of fertile land, in heads of cattle, in gold dust weighed on a jittery scale. But the earth keeps its own ledger, and sometimes, the greatest treasures are those we first dismiss as worthless. Salt, for instance. It is the taste of the ocean and the sting of a tear, the preserver of life and the scourer of wounds. It is so common as to be forgotten, yet without it, the heart of a community can stop beating. I know this because my sister and I inherited a cave full of it, and in doing so, inherited the scorn of an entire town. We were 17 years of age, Iris and I, the day we were turned out from the Redemption Gulch orphanage. The matron, a woman whose charity had long since curdled into resentment, handed us a single threadbare blanket and pointed toward the door. We were women now, she said, and the world had no more room for charity cases. We had nothing but the clothes on our backs, each other, and Fenris, a great German shepherd dog whose loyalty was the only currency we'd ever known. Our parents were ghosts, their faces lost to the fog of early memory. Our only known relation, a great-uncle we'd never met, had passed a month prior. His lawyer, a dry man with paper-thin skin, had summoned us to his dusty office. The town's more prominent citizens were there, vultures waiting for scraps. They smirked as the will was read. To them, we were nothing. To us, the will was a final, cruel joke. Our great-uncle Alastair left us his only possession, a deed to a patch of sun-scorched land in the Badlands, notable only for, in the lawyer's reedy voice, a cavern of significant saline deposits, a salt cave. Laughter, low and sharp, echoed in the small room. We were given a hole in the ground. The journey to our inheritance was a pilgrimage into desolation. We walked for 2 days, following the crude map the lawyer had provided, the dust of the trail coating our throats and stinging our eyes. Redemption Gulch shrank behind us, a place that had offered us shelter but never a home, and before us lay a landscape of cracked earth and skeletal mesas. The sun was a hammer, relentless and unforgiving. Iris, ever the quieter twin, walked with a steady, determined pace, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she could will a kinder world into existence. I watched her, drawing strength from her silence. Fenris trotted between us, his great head low, his panting breath the only sound in the vast, oppressive quiet. He was our guardian, our confidant, his presence a warm, living shield against the emptiness that surrounded us. Our worldly possessions were pitifully few, the blanket from the matron, a small sack with a stale loaf of bread and a skin of water, and a worn-out tinderbox. We were 2 girls against a wilderness that had swallowed men far stronger. When we finally crested the last rise, we saw it. The land was just as worthless as the town had crowed. It was a bowl of dust and rock, dotted with thorny scrub and defiant, twisted junipers. At its center stood a small, dilapidated cabin, its timbers warped and bleached gray by 1,000 merciless suns. And behind it, a dark moor in the side of a low cliff, the entrance to our cave. A cold dread, heavier than our fatigue, settled in my stomach. This was not a beginning, it felt like an end. We had been cast out, only to be given a tomb. As we approached the cabin, the door hanging crooked on a single leather hinge, a gust of wind moaned through the opening, a desolate welcome to our new, lonely life. The mockery from the lawyer's office felt less like a sting and more like a prophecy. We were the Salt Cave girls, inheritors of nothing. The cabin was a single room, thick with the dust of years and the scent of abandonment. A rickety table, a single chair, and a stone hearth were its only furnishings. But in the corner, covered by a moth-eaten canvas sheet, was a large, iron-banded trunk. It was unlocked. With a shared, hesitant breath, Iris and I lifted the heavy lid. There was no gold, no hidden cache of coins. Instead, we found something far stranger. There were finely crafted tools of a kind we had never seen, small, sharp-headed hammers, delicate chisels, and strange metal picks. There were several lanterns, their glass surprisingly clean, and a good stock of oil. And beneath it all, resting on a bed of dried lavender, was a thick, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn smooth with use, and the pages within were filled with a meticulous, elegant script. It was the voice of our great-uncle Alastair. He was not the failed prospector we had imagined. His words painted a picture of a man who saw the world not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood. He was a scholar of the earth. He wrote of geology, of the slow, patient language of stone and crystal. The journal was not a diary of loneliness, but a conversation with the land itself. They see a cave, one entry read, I see a library. Every layer of stone is a page, every crystal a word written by time itself. This is not a hole of worthless salt, but a pantry, a deep larder stocked by the ancient seas. One must simply learn how to read the shells. His voice, silent for years, became our teacher. He was not there in body, but his mind, his curiosity, his deep and abiding respect for the hidden world beneath our feet, filled that small, dusty cabin. He became our mentor, speaking to us from beyond the grave, and for the first time since leaving the orphanage, a flicker of something other than despair began to warm my chest. Armed with Alistair's journal and 2 of his lanterns, we decided to face our inheritance. Fenris stayed close to my side, his low growl echoing slightly as we pushed past the heavy, stagnant air at the cave's mouth. The entrance was narrow, a mere fissure in the rock, but it soon opened into a space that stole our breath. The lantern light didn't just illuminate the darkness, it ignited it. The walls were not dull stone. They were a tapestry of crystal that glittered and shone with a life of their own. Great veins of rose-hued salt, the color of a dawn sky, swirled through strata of pure, milky white. In places, the salt formed delicate, branching structures that looked like frozen trees. The air was cool and still, carrying a clean, mineral scent that was ancient and profoundly calming. It was utterly silent, save for the soft drip of water somewhere in the deep dark, a sound like a slow, patient clock ticking off the centuries. We followed the maps Alistair had so carefully drawn in his journal. He had named the chambers as one would name the rooms of a house, the Grotto of Whispers, the Alabaster Hall, the Vein of Dawn. He guided us, his words a map to understanding what we saw. Note the clarity of the crystals in the northern passage, he wrote. This is the purest form, ideal for the table, for fine curing. The pink salt from the western wall is rich in minerals, a tonic for livestock. We ran our hands over the walls. They were cool and surprisingly smooth, like polished glass. We chipped off a small piece, as he instructed, and tasted it. It was a burst of clean, potent flavor, nothing like the coarse, grayish salt we were used to. We were not standing in a worthless hole. We were standing in a treasure room. That night, huddled in the cabin, reading more of the journal by the fire, Iris looked at me, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. For the first time, her face was not a mask of quiet endurance, but one of nascent wonder. We had been given more than a cave, we had been given a purpose. Our small supply of bread was gone, and the water skin was nearly empty. Survival, for the moment, depended not on the cave, but on the town that had scorned us. I chose several of the most beautiful blocks of salt, one a pale, translucent white, another the color of a summer rose. I wrapped them carefully in a piece of canvas and, with Fenris at my heels, made the long walk back to Redemption Gulch. The town felt different now. It was no longer a place of judgment, but a place of necessity. I walked directly to Abernathy's Mercantile, the heart of the town's commerce. The bell above the door chimed, and all conversation stopped. A few patrons, including the imposing rancher Mr. Finch, turned to look at me. His lip curled into a familiar sneer. Well, if it isn't one of the Salt Princesses, he drawled, loud enough for the whole store to hear. Come to trade us a rock for a loaf of bread. My cheeks burned, but I held my ground, remembering Alistair's quiet confidence in his journal. I walked to the counter and unwrapped the blocks, placing them gently on the warm wood. Mr. Abernathy, an older man with kind eyes and hands dusted with flour, leaned forward, his spectacles perched on his nose. He ignored the snickers from the onlookers. He picked up the pink block, holding it to the light. He scraped a tiny flake off with his thumbnail and tasted it. His eyebrows shot up. He looked from the salt to me, and for the first time, someone in that town looked at me and saw something other than an orphan. My word, he said, his voice a low murmur of surprise. He remembered my great-uncle. Alistair, he said softly. The man knew his earth. He turned to me, his gaze direct and serious. "This is fine-grade salt, girl. Finer than anything I can get from the freight wagons." He offered me a trade that was more than fair: a full sack of flour, beans, dried apples, bacon, and a fresh tin of kerosene. As he packed my supplies, he leaned in and whispered, "Quality speaks for itself." Let it. Walking out of that store, my sack heavy on my shoulder, Mr. Finch's stunned silence was more satisfying than any words. It was the first brick in the foundation of our new life. The validation from Mr. Abernathy was a spark, and we fanned it into a fire. The weeks that followed were a blur of labor and learning. We became students of salt, our great-uncle our only teacher, his journal our only textbook. We rose with the sun, the cool morning air a balm against the coming heat, and descended into the quiet, crystalline world beneath the earth. We learned to read the subtle shifts in the stone, to know where a vein would be pure and where it would be brittle. We mastered the use of the tools, learning that brute force was the enemy. It was about patience, about listening to the rock and persuading it to yield its treasures. A gentle tap with the hammer, a precise placement of the chisel, it was a craft, a delicate art. Iris had a particular gift for it. Her quiet nature translated into a deep patience, her hand steady and sure as she worked to free perfect, clear blocks from the cavern walls. I was stronger, better suited to hauling the heavy blocks out on the sled we fashioned from old planks. We worked in a rhythm of shared, unspoken understanding, a silent dance of effort and purpose. Fenris was our sentinel, often lying at the cave mouth, his ears twitching at the slightest sound from the outside world, a furry guardian of our subterranean sanctuary. We followed Alistair's notes on refining the salt, building a grinding station with flat stones to create different grades, from coarse crystals for preserving hides to a fine, powdery salt for the table. We even experimented with an idea from a margin note in his journal, gathering wild sage and thyme from the hillsides, drying them, and crushing them into the salt, creating an aromatic blend that filled our small cabin with the scent of the wilderness. We were no longer just surviving, we were creating. The cave was not our prison, it was our workshop, our sanctuary, our legacy. We were building a life, crystal by crystal, from the very earth that had been gifted to us. The late autumn that year was a beautiful lyre. The days were warm and golden, the sky a vast, untroubled canvas of blue. It was the kind of weather that lulled a person into a false sense of security, a belief that the gentleness would last forever. The ranchers, Mr. Finch among them, took advantage of the mild season, pushing their herds higher into the mountain meadows for the last of the rich grazing, confident they would have weeks to bring them down before the first snow. The town of Redemption Gulch was complacent, content. Only Mr. Abernathy seemed to carry a sense of unease. "The squirrels are hoarding pine cones like they know something we don't," he told me one day as I traded a sack of our sage-infused salt for coffee and sugar. "And the sky at dusk has a greenish tint. My grandfather always said that's a sign of a deep freeze coming." His warnings were dismissed as the ramblings of an old man. But in our cabin, Alistair's journal offered a similar caution. "The land speaks in whispers before it roars," he had written. "Watch the animals. Feel the air not on your skin, but in your bones. The great white silence does not announce its arrival, it descends." Iris and I felt it. There was a change in the wind at night, a sharper edge to it that cut deeper than the temperature suggested. The coyotes sounded different, their calls more frantic, closer. We took the warnings, both from the old storekeeper and our silent mentor, to heart. We began to work with a new urgency, not just for our own winter stores, but to build a surplus. We spent long days in the cool, constant temperature of the cave, extracting and hauling, our muscles aching but our resolve firm. We filled every crate, every barrel, every spare corner of the cabin with salt. We were preparing for a storm the rest of the world refused to see coming. The storm came not as a whisper, but as a scream. It was a blue norther, a wave of impossible cold that swept down from the plains without warning, turning the golden autumn into a brutal, ice-locked winter in the space of a single afternoon. The temperature plummeted with shocking speed. Then came the snow. It fell not in gentle flakes, but in a thick, blinding torrent, driven by a wind that howled like a hungry wolf. For 3 days, the world disappeared into a churning vortex of white. When it finally stopped, the land was unrecognizable, buried under a blanket of snow so deep it covered fences and turned familiar hills into smooth, alien dunes. The roads to the outside world were gone, erased. Redemption Gulch was an island in a sea of frozen silence. The true crisis revealed itself slowly. The ranchers' herds were trapped in the high country, starving and freezing. The few that could be reached were perishing. Worse, the sudden freeze meant that what little meat people had in their larders was beginning to spoil. The town's supply of curing salt, always a finite commodity reliant on freight wagons, dwindled with terrifying speed. Panic began to curdle the town's spirit. A community that had felt secure and self-sufficient was suddenly facing the very real prospect of starvation. The thing they had in abundance, cattle, now dead or dying, was useless without the one thing they had always taken for granted. Salt. The common, everyday mineral had become more precious than gold. The laughter that had filled the lawyer's office months ago now echoed as a bitter, terrible irony. The worthless inheritance of the orphaned girls, the hole in the ground, was now the town's only hope. The first to come was Mr. Finch. He appeared at our door as a ghost, his face gaunt and grey with frost, his formidable frame stooped with desperation. He had travelled for a full day on snowshoes, a journey of a few miles that had nearly cost him his life. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his breath pluming in the frigid air, the arrogance stripped from him, leaving only a raw, humbled fear. His entire herd, his life's work, was trapped and dying in the high meadows. "I need it," he finally rasped, his voice raw. "I need the salt. For licks, to draw them down. And to save the meat of the ones we've lost." Iris and I looked at each other. There was no triumph in his humiliation, only a shared sense of grim necessity. This was not about revenge. It was about survival, ours, the town's. We did not gloat or remind him of his mockery. We named our price, but not in coin. Money was useless paper in a frozen world. We asked for 2 breeding pairs of his best cattle, to be delivered in the spring. We asked for a standing contract for lumber from the sawmill, and a monthly delivery of grain from his own stores once the thaw came. He agreed without hesitation. He helped us load a heavy sled, his powerful muscles joining ours, and as he prepared to leave, he paused. "I was wrong about you," he said, meeting my eyes. "About your great-uncle, it was all the apology we needed." News travelled fast. Soon, a steady stream of townsfolk made the treacherous trek to our cabin. We became the heart of the town's struggle to survive. With Mr. Abernathy's help, we set up a system of barter, ensuring everyone got what they needed. A blacksmith traded future work for salt to cure a hog. A seamstress traded mended clothes and new winter cloaks. We became providers, organizers, leaders. The Salt Princesses were now the Salt Sisters, our once-mocked inheritance, the very substance that was holding the community together, preserving not just their meat, but their hope. When the great thaw finally came, it was as if the world was being born anew. The snow receded, revealing a landscape scrubbed clean, and the air filled with the scent of damp earth and the promise of spring. Redemption Gulch had survived. It was leaner, harder, but it was whole. And it was changed. Iris and I were no longer the outcasts, the orphans at the edge of town. We were a part of its center, our cabin a frequent stop for neighbors, our counsel sought, our presence respected. Mr. Finch was true to his word, delivering the finest cattle from his surviving herd. The Salt Cave, once a symbol of our lowly status, had become the town's most vital asset, a shared resource that had bound us all together in the face of annihilation. Our great-uncle Alistair's legacy was not just the salt, but the wisdom he had left us, the ability to see value where others saw none, to find purpose in the overlooked corners of the world. We had not just inherited a piece of land, we had inherited a way of seeing. Now, as I stand at the mouth of that cave, feeling the cool, ancient air on my face, I think about the nature of worth. What is the value of the things you have been given? The things you carry inside you, unseen by others? Perhaps you have been handed a legacy that seems strange, small, or even worthless in the eyes of the world. A quiet talent, a peculiar curiosity, a story no one else wants to hear. Do not be so quick to dismiss it. For in the deep, quiet places of the earth and the soul, the most vital treasures are often hidden. And when the unexpected winter of your life arrives, it may be that very thing, the overlooked and underestimated part of your inheritance, that will see you through the storm. What is your salt cave? Find it. Learn its language. For it may just be the thing that saves you.